Well, thank you very much, Minister Goodale, for agreeing to take some time with me during what I know is a very busy time for you. And for agreeing to allow us to record this conversation so that we can share it with grain grower members across the country.
Sure, happy to do that.
So on August 6th, you wrote a piece for our newsletter, Election Insights, title of which was "The Federal Agriculture Agenda is Driving Growth." And so the piece was largely around a reflection, if you will, around some of the Liberal Party accomplishments during your time as government. The nature of the conversation has since shifted. We find ourselves now 2 months later in the middle of an election campaign, and we're talking more about what we as voters and our farmer members can expect should the Liberal Party have an opportunity to form government again. And so with that, I thought I would talk a little bit about some of our members' greatest priorities, starting with, as you can well imagine, international trade.
Right.
And so in September of this year, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appointed economic advisor Dominic Barton to serve as Canada's ambassador to China during what is a very critical time between the two countries. China, as you know, is a key market for Canadian farmers. And so this move was broadly supported by Canada's agriculture sector, but it was seen as the first step, if you will, in normalizing relationships and relations between Canada and China. What has to happen, in your view, if Canada wants to reset the relationship with China?
Well, it is a big and complicated relationship, and one that has grown more complicated over the last several years. It's no great comfort, but Canada is certainly not alone in facing certain challenges in relation to China. There is a huge trade war going on between the United States and China, some of which is reverberating back to other countries like our own. So the challenges around the world in terms of the relationship with China are very real and very large. Some of it's economic, some of it is national security and other issues. From Canada's point of view, the issue is not just livelihoods affected by trade disruptions, but also lives, because there are 2 Canadians in custody, in jeopardy in China, and that also colors the relationship and is a very distinct overlay that we always need to be aware of and sensitive to. The appointment of Ambassador Barton was a very good step in the right direction. As you say, it's the first step. It's not by any means the solution or the total solution, but it is a very positive step. The selection of Ambassador Barton was well received in Canada and well received in China. In fact, as you know, in the diplomatic process, the naming of an ambassador must be accepted by the country to whom the ambassador is assigned, and China has accepted and officially received Mr. Barton. That is a good indication of some of the standoff that was there earlier is perhaps beginning to moderate. Now that the ambassador is in place, I think a number of steps can be taken. We should be looking, I think, at sectoral teams from Canada, people who have an established relationship with customers or others in China, being able to be in contact with their contacts. That may be in the mining industry or in the financial services industry. It could be in any sector where there's an established relationship. I would hope that all Canadians would want to be in touch with their Chinese contacts and counterparts to work at repairing the lines of communication and to get the situation heading toward a more normal situation. It is interesting that while certain commodities like canola, obviously, have been terribly disrupted, other agricultural commodities and other types of products have continued to move apparently without difficulty. So there are channels that we need to work and encourage to be part of the the overall solution. This is going to take toughness and persistence and a lot of diplomacy. While that is going on, and I don't pretend it can happen instantly, it's going to take time. We need to do several other things. Diversifying our trading options is one of those things. That's not easy. You can't do that by a flip of a switch either. But Jim Carr has been specifically named Minister of Trade Diversification for a very important reason, to identify other markets, develop those other markets, go after those other markets. While that's happening as well, we need to make sure that the income support mechanisms, the trade disruption compensation mechanisms that can keep Canadians whole during this period of time are fully functioning. In that regard, the business risk management tools that you and I have discussed on other occasions, they are clearly in need of renovation and improvement and strengthening. And that work must go forward. I'm glad that the federal provincial ministers have agreed, at least in principle, to carry on that conversation. They need to get on with it. And all levels of government are going to have to be prepared to make those programs stronger so that they are meaningful to farmers when this kind of a situation occurs, and not at the last minute. There's a long lead up that goes into getting those programs in better shape. I think we also need to, and we've started this, rally other countries around the world who are experiencing some sort of the same difficulty, to work with each other, to say with a united voice that some of the tactics and strategies and approaches that have been pursued by China are counterproductive and do not enhance the international relationship anywhere in the world. As I said, this is big and complicated, but we have to move on all of those fronts and undoubtedly others to try to get the situation back to something that is closer to normal.
Thank you. It's harvest time across Canada, and this is the time when our farmer members are marketing their crops. Because they grow more than Canadians can consume, the majority of our crops are exported to overseas markets. So farmers earn a good portion of their livelihood from what is becoming an increasingly volatile and unpredictable marketplace. What would your government do to eliminate the rising non-tariff barriers and ensure commercially viable access to export markets for Canadian farmers?
You know, this was the great fear 25 years ago when we moved from the old GATT into the new WTO, and some of the old rules and arrangements that had been in place were replaced by what was called tariffication. And the great concern was how soon will some countries move to some other kind of trade disruptive tactic if they can't use tariffs to do, and we're seeing that exactly now. It's interesting. 25 years ago, the world was celebrating this multilateral achievement of a new WTO, and since then, some of that spirit of multilateralism has deteriorated, and we're back to a number of one-off situations rather than a multilateral approach. I think we've got to try as well as we can through the WTO and through other international mechanisms to try to restore the spirit of a multilateral approach, a rules-based approach for a country like Canada that is very productive, but not the biggest player on the block. We need a rules-based system, and the multilateral framework can help to provide that. But given the deterioration that's taken place in support for the WTO kind of concept, Brexit is an example of that, where a trading arrangement seems to be falling apart. So it's not an isolated example. while we're working at restoring what the multilateral set of rules can do, we also need to be prepared to pursue our legal rights, as we have now started to do in relation to China by leveling a protest there through the WTO. Those legal rights are there for a reason. It takes time. It's not a perfect solution. But if you don't pursue the legal right, then someone at some point will assume that you've given it up, and we can't do that. We also need to be prepared in the right circumstances to retaliate strategically. We did that with cools. We made it the country of origin labeling. We made it very clear to the United States that we had a response list ready and that we were prepared to invoke that list and apply retaliation. And cools was taken away, and that was very helpful for our livestock producers. Similarly with steel and aluminum, we had the largest retaliation ever in Canadian trade history, and it worked its way through the American system, and ultimately the illegal tariffs on steel and aluminum were removed. So you have to make a tactical judgment about what particular tool will work in any given circumstance. But we need to make it clear to those who may be putting Canada at a disadvantage or treating us unfairly that we have retaliation rights, and we will use them where that is in Canada's interest. We also need to implement as quickly as we can the new trading deals that we've successfully negotiated with the EU in the CETA, with Mexico and the United States through the new NAFTA, as I still call it, and the new arrangement with Asia Pacific. Taken together, that gives Canadians access to a market of about 1.5 billion people. We have more market access than any of our counterparts in the G7. So the sooner we are able to get through all the legislative hoops and get all of those trading agreements implemented, the better it will be. That will open new opportunities, but that needs to be followed by an aggressive marketing plan. Getting the trade deals in place is one thing. That kind of opens the door. But the open door doesn't do you any good unless you are aggressively going through the door and making the deals, moving the product. We have been better, I think, in the last number of years at negotiating the new trade deals than actually marshaling what used to be that Team Canada effort to get through the door, do the deal, sell the product, move the Canadian goods into world trade. So all of that, I think, is required in order to deal with a very difficult world trade atmosphere in which some countries are moving decidedly in the wrong direction.
Thank you. So shifting gears now for my final question. Canadian farmers, as you know, are amongst the most innovative and sustainable in the world. They're constantly adopting new technology and practices that allow them to grow more food with fewer inputs and fewer resources.
Yes.
But according to the 2019 edition of the IMD World Competitiveness Ranking, the first time since 1997 has Canada fallen out of the top 10. This report cites the lack of innovation as being one of the primary causes. So what is your vision as it relates not only to Canada's agriculture sector, but also to the country when it comes to the government's role in encouraging innovation and investment in Canada?
Well, to start with, we have to make sure that the fundamentals are in good shape. We have a stable legal system. We have a very talented workforce. We have a good healthcare system. We have a peaceful and secure society, all of which contributes to being a good place to do business and to make investments. All of that is to the good for Canada, stands to our credit. We need to maintain the two critical fiscal principles that we have mentioned in the last several budgets, but most particularly in the current election platform, and that is maintaining Canada's AAA credit rating and maintaining the best debt ratio in the G7. That is a decided competitive advantage. Canada's debt ratio is now around 30-31%. 15, 20 years ago, it was 70%, which was absolutely unsustainable. So we're now leading the Western world in terms of our debt standing in the definition of the debt ratio, which is a distinct improvement, and that allows us to maintain our AAA credit rating. Those fiscal anchors are extremely important to our competitive position. We need to consider the appropriate tax measures, as we did in the fall of last year when we launched the much improved accelerated capital cost allowance, which now for machinery and for technology, equipment, and buildings in most sectors of the economy allows write-offs to happen in 3 years or less, which helps to accelerate the pace of investment. We now have, because of those tax changes, we have the best marginal effective tax rates in the G7. We are better than the average in the OECD, and we are 5 points better than the United States, which would be our principal competitive comparison. So those sorts of techniques, accelerated capital cost allowance, even refundable accelerated capital cost allowance, structured in the right way, can be very helpful in encouraging the kind of investment and growth we would like to see. Investing in the right kind of infrastructure is also exceedingly important, like trade gateways and corridors and port facilities. We now have a brand new Prairie Port at Churchill, which only a couple of years ago was totally shut down and dysfunctional. It's now a new export alternative that we want to see fully developed. But investing in the infrastructure that gets our products and commodities into export position is extremely important. So we're physically able to move our valuable commodities into world trade. That includes the investments we've made in short-line rail systems, in highways that are part of the national trade network. And another strategic investment is water. We want to expand our productive capacity, and we will use all the tools of innovation and technology to do that, but you still need the fundamentals of soil and water. And water resources on the prairies are going to come under greater and greater pressure because of climate change. The old story, we either have too much water or too little of it, and it's usually in the wrong place. So how can we engineer the right kind of water development and control infrastructure to make the maximum use of this very precious freshwater resource, which Canada is especially endowed in all of the world, but that endowment is threatened by climate change. So we need to make sure that we've got the infrastructure tools in place to flood-proof, to drought-proof, to do value-added diversification in production as much as possible. And then investing in skills. We need a talented workforce going forward. We have one. It is a well-educated workforce, but that race for knowledge and for science never stops. So you need to keep on making the investments in science and in innovation to keep pace with the rest of the world. And in that regard, the new protein supercluster across Western Canada, based largely in Saskatchewan, but encompassing a great portion of agricultural Canada. We want to be the very best in the world at everything that has to do with protein, growing it, learning how to grow it better, learning how to manipulate it and manufacture products and goods that flow from it, financing it, the logistics of transporting it. Having this supercluster has enormous potential It's been estimated by the private sector that we could be adding 4,500 jobs and 4.5% to GDP if we become the world's best at knowing everything that we need to know about plant protein. So those are the kinds of things that we have started to do, and I think can do better in order to attract investment and to be innovative as any of our competitors, and hopefully more so.
Thank you. And if I may, maybe one final question. I think it was a week ago now that the Liberal Party released their platform. Mm-hmm. Are there any aspects of the platform that you would like to, as part of our conversation today, that you'd like to highlight?
There are two or three things. One would be the commitment we made to re-examine the business risk management tools. That has to be done in close collaboration with farmers. They know what will work and what will not work for their operations. Clearly, the changes that were made back in 2012 lowered the efficacy of those tools to the point where a lot of farmers just lost interest. It wasn't worth their while to participate. So we have to revisit all of that with the provinces to figure out how the thresholds and the margins can be readjusted so that the tools are effective in dealing with environmental issues or crop failures or the typical kind of challenge that farmers have to face on any given year, but also trade disruptions, which apparently are going to become more and more part of what we have to deal with globally. So we need to get on with that conversation with the provinces and with farm organizations just as soon as the election is over to develop the better risk management tools. We also signaled in the platform that we want to continue the work on the intergenerational transfer of family farms. That is an issue for a great many farmers, how they move their enterprise from them to their children in a way that is tax efficient, and we have to find the tools to make that more conducive than it is today. Also, there was a request made by the canola producers for revisiting the use of Canadian canola in biofuels, and that too is in the platform to make sure that we're maximizing that development opportunity, particularly for canola, given that it's under such pressure. The one thing we want to be careful of, though, is as we say move up the mandate of what is required in a biofuel in terms of the plant content, that we're using Canadian canola and not American soy. It's really important that this work to the advantage of Canadian producers, and that will take some careful thought to make sure that is happening properly. The one final thing I would mention is the enhancement and strengthening of Farm Credit Canada. Mm-hmm. This is a fine financial institution. Among the family of federal financial institutions, the BDC and the CCC and all of the others, the EDC, Farm Credit Corporation is one of the leading agencies. It's got a great reputation, but it could be even better. So we're proposing to put in $5 billion in terms of new capitalization to let it expand its book of business. And to encompass all dimensions of agriculture and agri-food, including the need to be more aggressive in export markets. And FCC, I'm sure, has the talent and the strength to be able to tackle that challenge and be a further asset to farmers and to food processors all across the country.
Great, thank you. On behalf of members from grain growers across the country, I'm very grateful to have had an opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you very much.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
It.